Right now on Upfront.
The Chief Justice.
Justice Susan Crawford, welcome. You look right at home.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court just hours from taking the show on the road. The court's 4-3 liberal majority, the intense politics and record spending, and now the new security threats targeting justices.
Are the threats active and real right now?
We'll get to it all one-on-one. Our new interview with Chief Justice Jill Karofsky. Shutdown showdown.
They're doing this because they have Trump derangement syndrome.
Day 26 of the federal government shutdown. Now the growing impact in states like Wisconsin.
All hell's gonna break loose here.
New pressure on state lawmakers and that Republican bill to legalize medical marijuana. We're one-on-one with Senate President Mary Felskowski. And voters weighing in. Will public polling sway lawmakers on Capitol Hill? And that new Wisconsin poll just days away. Marquette Law School poll director Charles Franklin with the preview.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Just hours now until the state Supreme Court takes the show on the road, and a ton of attention now on the politics of the court and the now 4-3 liberal majority. Tomorrow, for the first time in 4 years, the court is holding oral arguments outside the state capitol. The court will convene tomorrow morning at the Richland County Courthouse. The Justice on Wheels program meant to better educate and be more accessible to Wisconsinites. And what a time as we sat down with the new Chief Justice, Jill Karofsky.
Most recently, we know a Racine man is sitting in jail charged with stalking you. I'm curious, how broad are the threats facing justices as you and I sit here today?
The threat of political violence in this state and in this country, Matt, is real. And it is going the wrong direction. It is rising. I've always been concerned my whole career about protecting people in the court system. Before I was ever a judge, I spent almost 30 years protecting victims and witnesses in this system. I believe that every single person who comes in contact with the Wisconsin state court system, jurors, victims, witnesses, defendants, attorneys, bailiffs, court staff, judges, and justices, every single one of those people, when they come in contact with this system, deserve to be safe and secure. We can't ensure justice for people unless they can walk into courtrooms and know that they can seek justice and be safe doing so.
Are the threats active and real right now?
Absolutely.
Targeting justices?
Yeah, targeting justices and targeting judges and targeting other political figures in this state and in this country, yes.
Is the legislature doing enough?
I have met with both members of Governor Evers' office, and I have met with legislators on both sides of the aisle. And I will tell you this is an issue that transcends partisan politics. This is an issue where everyone is trying to figure out the best solutions. Right now we have 4 law enforcement officers who are responsible statewide for the security of the entire judiciary. And I don't mean just the 7 Supreme Court justices, I mean the entire judicial system. They work with the local officials in the different counties to ensure that the counties also are helping to make sure that judges are safe, but we have only 4 officers dedicated to that. We have funding for those officers through next August, and I have been working with the legislature and the governor's office to ensure funding for those 4 positions through the rest of the biennium, which would take us to the end of the current budget cycle.
When we look at the court broadly, there's been a lot of attention on the court in recent years. The 2 most expensive races, probably the 2 most political races. What has that done to the reputation of the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
I'm not sure what it's done to the reputation. I think everyone has their own view of the court. I'm happy to share with you what my view of the court is. My view of the court is this, that you have 7 people who have run for statewide office, who have had millions of dollars spent against them, millions of dollars for people to just try to destroy them, and they have won. So the 7 of us now are elected. We are asked to decide the most difficult questions of today. And I think when you look at our opinions, when you see the result of all of that work being done the right way, what you see when you look at those opinions from the last 2 years is you see far more opinions that end up 7-0 or 6-1 or 5-2 than you do 4-3.
When you see, whether it be in a campaign or where have you, that Democrats are voting and cheering for the liberal justices, Republicans are voting and cheering for the conservative justices, does that give you pause or concern?
I think what I see and what I have seen in 4 of the 5 last elections, and I'm thinking about Justice Rebecca Dallett's election, my election, Justice Janet Prosasewicz's election, and Justice Susan Crawford's election, is that all of us won by more than 10 points. What I'm seeing in these elections is an electorate that is highly informed, because it's impossible not to be informed about these elections with the amount of coverage that is out there, both paid and unpaid media. It is a very informed electorate, clearly making a decision, the direction that they want to see this court go.
And what's that direction?
I think what they are telling us is that the court was really carrying the water for a long time for right-wing special interests, and they did not want that anymore. They have asked us to follow the rule of law. They have asked us to make our decisions based on what the law is and not what the right-wing special interest is asking for.
Does that mean undoing what Republicans have done in the legislature?
I think you'd have to look at our individual, in some instances it might, in some instances it might not. I mean, we can talk about some of the cases that I think you're referencing, and there are cases where we have undone what the governor has tried to do as well.
I was going to say, can you give me an example for those skeptics out there who say this new liberal majority is only going to rule in favor of Democrats? Is there an exception to that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I would look at our DPI case from the very end of last term. Certainly, I think is a good example. Yeah.
As you know, on the campaign trail and even amidst justices, there's always talk of recusal, whether it be individual cases or broadly. And you would like to address that in a public way.
Yes, I would like to address it in a public way. I think there are a lot of questions about recusal. I think right now we are operating under a rule that came from the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. It came through a process that wasn't open and was not transparent. I think being open and being transparent, I think the court being open and transparent and accountable to the people of Wisconsin is important. Before I was Chief Justice, it was difficult for me to move the recusal issue to the front burner, but I plan to do that, plan to have a hearing, plan to bring people into the hearing room and to listen to all points of view to figure out the best way to craft a recusal rule that will work going forward.
So you would like to see a stronger recusal rule in place?
Yes, I would like to bring people in and find out what is the best rule we can have, listening to all points of view.
That's a very controversial thought.
Bringing people in and listening to their points of view.
Stronger recusal rule.
It might be, but people are also calling for, they want us to look at it. And I think that we should hold the rule that we have right now up to the light. And if it's not working, we should change it.
Are you thinking money? Are you thinking politics? Is there something specific in mind that I guess would be your base in starting this conversation?
What I want to do is hear from people first and then make the decision second. I want to gather the information so that we can put forward and have, for the people of Wisconsin, the best rule possible.
What's your timeline in terms of when you would potentially like any new rule in place or up for debate?
Right. Hopefully we will have a hearing by the end of this term.
We just recently talked with Judge Maria Lazar. She's running, and there's another race upcoming in April, as you are aware. She told us last week that she did not think that the court was communicating, as in some of the liberal justices and the conservative justices are not talking with each other. Is that true?
I'm not sure where Judge Lazar got that information. It is not my experience. I will tell you that I have worked very, very hard at building the most collegial relationship possible with every single one of my colleagues. And I know if I picked up my phone this morning and I called any one of them, they would pick up or they would get back to me shortly thereafter.
Why was it important for you and the other justices, the liberal justices, to endorse Chris Taylor in this upcoming race?
I'm not going to speak for my colleagues. I will tell you why I did. I think Chris Taylor is an incredibly talented judge. When I won my seat to the Supreme Court, she succeeded me in Branch 12 in the Dane County Court, and we had many, many discussions as I was transitioning to the Supreme Court and she was transitioning to serve onto the Circuit Court.
Do you think that blurs the line again for voters when justices are endorsing in the race?
I don't think so. I think voters want to know, Look, if you have been on the Supreme Court for 5 years, if you served on the Circuit Court for 3 years, if you watched this person perform the job, or a job very similar to the one that they are running for, how did they perform? How did they do? Who has a better seat to that than someone who's actually been there watching them perform the duties of the job?
Do you continue to see the court as being a referee in terms of what the legislature has done?
I think our job is to look at the laws that the legislature passes and make sure that they're constitutional. And yes, I think that's always been the role of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I think it's the role of the Wisconsin Supreme Court today, and I think it'll be the role of the Wisconsin Supreme Court tomorrow.
We recently also talked with Supreme Court Justice Brian Hagedorn. You can watch that interview right now on the 12 News YouTube page. Just look for the Upfront playlist. Coming up, day 26 of the federal government shutdown, the growing impact here in Wisconsin, plus that Republican proposal to legalize medical marijuana meets the public. Our new conversation with Republican Senate President Mary Felskowski next.